Good morning guys, welcome to the next tutorial in the Jmeter series, and today we'll be working on Jmeter's controllers. So before I explain you how controller works, so basic definition of controllers in Jmeter is they would control the flow of execution as per your requirement. For example, you may want some requests to run for say multiple times, whereas you want other requests to be executing as normal. For example, there could be group of sets that you want to be executed for 3 times, whereas other you just want for 1 time. So then we'll be discussing on simple controller, loop controller, and transaction controller. So let's go to the Jmeter's home screen and let's see how all of these works. So this is the by default screen of Jmeter, and let's start with a simple controller. So simple controller is just a container in which you can store your requests. So maybe you will store your similar kind of request in a container that could be your simple controller. So how do you add controller? So you have to add a thread and then a thread group, and then right click on thread group, add logic controller. In that you can select simple controller. So this is a container and you can have multiple requests under it. So you can add a sampler, HTTP request, you can rename it as request1, request1. So let's assume this is going at Google's homepage, and you have another request here that is going to, let's say, Gmail path, right? So the server name is the same and you have just changed the path here. So let's add a listener here. So let me try to add table. So I can rename this as Gmail and can put it as home page. So this is just a simple container. Nothing else function is performed when you are storing a request under your simple controller. You'll execute it and you won't see you'll see the execution time of both the requests. That's it. Nothing function is performed, but it is just useful to store your request in a proper manner. For example, you can have login request under login. Login, all the requests are going along with the login under a simple controller, and it could be any function you want to store under a simple controller. So this is what simple controller is. So let's see how loop controller works. So I'm not adding all of these requests again. You can also change your controller by right clicking, change controller, logic controller, and you can select any controller out of this. So we are doing loop controller, right? So before explaining it, let me add another simple controller, say logic controller and simple controller, in which I have another request that is going to say calendar / calendar path of Google, and you have a listener here, say table, and let's add a listener outside all the blocks, outside both of the controllers. So you can add one more listener here. So let's go back to the loop controller, in which we have home page and Gmail. So when you open the loop controller, it has two options. Either you want loop count to be forever, and it could be 1. So if I put the loop count as 1, this both requests under that controller will be executed once only. If I put it 2 here, this home page and Gmail request will be executed twice, and this request, which is outside the loop controller, it may be in a simple controller or it's just simply outside the loop controller, it will be executed only once, because loop controller functions work only on the elements that are under it. To clarify more, let's execute and see what happens. So this is homepage, Gmail, homepage, and again Gmail. So this has executed 2 times each. And then your HTTP request, which was outside your loop controller, executed once. So loop controller can be used, if you want some request to, execute for multiple times, right? So this is what is loop controller, and next we want to talk about is transaction controller. So doing the same step again, right click, change controller, logic controller, and transaction controller. So when you open transaction controller, it says two options: generate parent sample or include duration of timer and preprocessors in generated sample. For example, if you have also included some preprocessors under this transaction controller, so it would also include the time taken for preprocessors or timers, and then would give you the sum, total transaction time, that would be the sum of your request. For example, it would be home page, I'm just abbreviating, time taken for the home page plus time taken for Gmail page, and if you select this option, it would be your timers plus preprocessor time. So this total would give your transaction time. For example, say assume this is login functionality and you have captured the total request under a login transaction controller, right? So I want to see how much time total login takes. So it would be your this request plus whatever timers or preprocessors you have used to perform your login operations. That would be a total transaction time for login. So let's see how it works. I'll erase the drawings. So what I am expecting here is this homepage time plus Gmail time would give me my transaction controller's time. Let's remove it and run. Homepage, Gmail, and transaction controller. You can see this plus this. It is adding both of them. 306 plus 1342 would give 1648. So transaction time is the total of all the requests that are under the transaction controller. So this is benefit apart from what it could be a simple controller which does not give the total time. The transaction controller gives you total time also. You can get this total time of your transaction. It could be your login or your logout, or it could be any banking transaction you're doing. So this kind of controller helps there. Right, so in this chapter we have discussed simple controller, which is just a simple container to store your request. Then loop controller if you want some requests to run for multiple times. And then you have transaction controller if you want to measure the total time taken by a particular transaction which may or may not include multiple requests. So that is all for today's session. In next session we'll be learning more controllers that are useful in real-time examples. Thank you.